Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Gabby Franco back to the King's Report. Welcome back.
Hi, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, let me just share people your bio. You were the first female shooter to represent Venezuela in the Olympics. You're an accomplished author, speaker, competitive shooter, instructor, and she's recognized worldwide for her shooting skills and advocacy for the right to own and bear arms. Your 25 years of experience in the Olympics, self-defense, and practical shooting has served as a platform to educate and empower thousands of people through live and virtual training across the U.S. and Puerto Rico. And you've won many medals and competitions and trained people, and you've done quite a bit.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I've been, one of the things I've learned in life is definitely a journey and trying to do my best. Sometimes, I have my goals and sometimes they deviate and turn into something bigger. So people tell me all the time, so you plan everything that you have accomplished. But no, I never tried to or thought of being on TV, but then the opportunity came to go to Top Shot and I took the opportunity. So sometimes life is all about opportunities. And when those opportunities present, you just need to tackle them and do your best.
That's great. And it's such a great testimony also. I mean, you came as an immigrant to the United States and it turned out well for you. I mean, I think, right?
Well, this is what I would say, as an immigrant, it's difficult to come here where it's a different culture. I didn't know the language. I just knew just a handful of people. I would say it turned out well for me because I really put my heart and mind into not letting myself down. Like many people, whether immigrants or not, because I think this is something that happens to all human beings. I have hit rock bottom in the United States, debt, unemployment, divorce, and all that stuff. But it just don't letting myself stay there, don't letting myself down, and obviously trusting in God and Jesus and putting my soul and my mind into thriving. It's hard. I'm not gonna say that was easy. I'm not gonna say that I was weeping. I never cried. I did a lot of that. But there's a point when you say, you know what? That's it. I can stay there crying in the darkness, or I can search for the light until I find it. Yeah.
Well, that's a good testimony too. Everyone goes through challenges and but we have a choice to make, right? Do I just kind of wallow in self-pity and say I'm a victim, or do I fight and overcome? So you overcame, yeah. And you have a son. Before the show started, you're telling me about your 6-year-old son. Do you want to say anything about him, or?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's my eyes, my light, my everything, my motivation. And in fact, many things I have done after he was born, just to not necessarily to show him, but it's for him to say, okay, if my mother could do that with so many limitations, like I went back to school, to university, full-time student, and graduated with honors, even though I never went to any type of education in the United States. So I went from not knowing how to write and grammar per se at all, straight to the university. So he is definitely more I can say. He has my whole heart and my soul.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, we learned last night that President Trump is being indicted for holding classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, his estate in Florida. Of course, the current resident of the White House, Mr. Biden, he's had classified documents all over the place for what 30 or 40 or 50 years. I don't know how long. Anyway, it's incredible contradiction. But tell us about your experience in Venezuela, because I think you were saying that you see some analogy between the harsh tactics that you're seeing being by the Biden administration and what you saw in Venezuela. Can you what was it like when you were young in Venezuela, and then how did that change?
Well, obviously in Venezuela, when I was young, Venezuela was thriving. It was not easy, but people who had a desire to build their business, they could do it. They could go through the process. Not much different than here in my eyes. I lived there in Venezuela up until I was 21. So I do have a clear memory of Venezuela. People could, in Venezuela, many people who didn't have a business per se, like a storefront or anything like that, they would sell on the streets, but they would go to Aruba and the islands to get merchandise to bring it back to Venezuela. So that tells you, even those people who didn't have these big stores, they could thrive. There was a way to do that. Unfortunately, as Hugo Chavez got into power, it was evident that if you were not with the government, if you did not align with those ideologies, then your life was going to start getting harder, and not harder in the way that you would say, okay, you're doing something bad. You are against the government in a way that you are being, disrupting the peace of the country. On the contrary, it was just a matter of if you spoke, if you were doing things differently, if you were running against the government, they will do everything in their power. They even had many political prisoners in Venezuela just because they were politicians who were running against Hugo Chavez or against Maduro. But to that point, I want to say something also that I think should resonate to many people here in the United States, regardless of on which side of the aisle you are. The biggest issue that I see, and it is very similar to Venezuela, is the hate to an individual or a group of individuals just because you disagree with them, which is, to me, is very wrong, right? And so this hate comes not only from regular people, comes from intellectuals, people who are, you would call smart individuals, professionals, lawyers, doctors, whatever, and so on and so forth. And what to me amazes me, like now, obviously, I went through all that and I can see it. What amazes me that these individuals who are smart, who are scholars or intellectuals, they agree with these tactics because they disagree with this person. So let's say in this case, Trump, right? They don't like Trump. They, in a sense, literally hate him. So they agree with these tactics, even though they may not be fair. Right. And so you think of it, an intellectual, something that is smart, would say, wait a second, I don't like the guy, but this would create a precedent. Right. Okay. I should not agree, even if I don't like the person. Everything should go through the law, and the justice should be fair for everybody. The moment you start deviating from it, in my eyes, your intellect, whether you think that you're a scholar, all that went down the drain, and all those years were wasted because you are not being able to see beyond your emotions and having more critical thoughts and understanding that what is wrong regardless. And law should be applied all across to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very important point you're making, that the left, because of their hatred for Donald Trump as someone who believes in capitalism and the free market and America first, these kinds of policies, and sometimes has annoying tweets and so on, but they're willing to use this scorched earth tactics. And I mean, even before he was inaugurated in office, they were bugging his office and trying to trap him. They even before he took office, they were spying on him, And it's unbelievable what they've done. And if we cannot stop this, then our country will not be a representative constitutional democracy. It'll be more totalitarian, authoritarian at minimum.
Right. And I think, and that's why I mention individuals, because we're often, we see the government and we talk about the government as if it is like an external entity away from us humans, like, oh, the government. But at the end of the day, the government is run by people, by lawyers, by prosecutors, by judges, by politicians. All those play a huge part in everything that happens in our country. And so that's why I talk about those intellectuals or those scholars or those people who are in power, that once they and us regular citizens should make them accountable for that. You know, whether you dislike an individual politician or not, us as citizens should always strive to, or push these bureaucrats and politicians to always follow the law and make sure that the law is applied equally to all. Because if they do that to somebody who has millions upon millions to defend himself, what is up to us? What is going to happen to us? And we have seen it even in after COVID. Doctors, psychologists have been shun out of put in the shadows just because they disagree with the idea with the government. And it's incredible that people don't see how these tactics can definitely ruin a nation. It destroys a nation, and destroys what, like you just said, destroys what we are. Like, we are a free society. And then at the end of the day, when you think about it, whose fault is it? Is it, yes, those bureaucrats who didn't apply the law equally to all, and those bureaucrats who were trying to get someone down just because they disagree with them, but it's also those citizens who agree with that tactic. And I think it's very important to put that guilt and that responsibility where it belongs to.
Absolutely. And then you look at the censorship policies, the government colluding with the big tech platforms to censor people, deplatform them, prevent them from speaking. Even doctors and researchers who are questioning about the COVID vaccines, and these are people who have spent their whole lives doing research, saying there's a problem here, we should talk about it. And you have these so-called fact checkers who have no medical background whatsoever, just canceling them. And I
just wish people, like, I just graduated from my bachelor's in psychology. So if I can tell you, I read 5 to 10 research papers every week, that's not even that was probably an understatement. I was reading a lot to even write my own papers. And I wish people in general, especially those who always said, follow the science, read research papers, understand how research papers are written, their context, what they do and what they do not. Once we were going through all this process, I was just talking to my husband, and again, psychology and science, and I was reading science, and I was telling my husband, I don't follow that ideology because, the more you read about research papers in science in general in the past, you understand that everything that we did many things that we did in the past were either wrong, some were done because the scientist wanted to have a name for himself. Sometimes they change data. And I'm not saying that that's all. No, I mean, science has saved us a lot. I mean, I just had surgery. Thank you, science, for that. Don't get me wrong. But we have to be skeptical. And we have to always look and say, we always have to have these conversations and say, okay, fine, give me your numbers, your data, but I am skeptical because of this, especially when we talk about research in science, there are variables and they cannot account with all variables. And so as a skeptical, I say, well, okay, you're telling me that this is good for all, I would say no, that's almost impossible. And that's it, and that's the wrong part that they did and during the vaccine and the pandemic, and that's part of the government tried to rule for us. And I think during the pandemic was to me was for many, I hope it was an eye-opening how easily politicians and bureaucrats can really shred the Constitution in front of our eyes.
That's true. It looks to me like they have total contempt for the First Amendment. Obviously, the Second Amendment, Governor Newsom from California wants to pass an amendment to the Constitution so they can have more gun control and, I guess, confiscate people's firearms. It is quite scary to me. And then you have the role of the media. And the media, instead of informing people about different viewpoints and so on, the media is like an organ of government propaganda. I wonder if you could talk about that. What is the media like in Venezuela?
Well, the media in Venezuela was very nice before Hugo Chavez, like everything, until the government actually started taking over the media. Literally, we're pushing aside those free thinkers per se. So it may be a little bit different because in this case, which I don't understand, the media is doing this almost willingly, or so we think. They may have some interest that we don't know about, that probably are, whether it's with China, other countries, or even the government, some ideologies that they want to push. But at the end of the day, it's almost like literally they're shooting themselves in the foot, because when you go to these ideas that you only push for one side and you're not really educating people and you're not really, gaining the trust of people, the media, and we've seen lately, they lose credibility. So it is terrible in so many different ways.
Yeah, I think the American people they have a very low opinion of the media currently, and for very good reason. One issue may be that they're getting a lot of advertising money from Pfizer Corporation and various pharmaceutical companies that want to sell drugs and so on. And so there may be monetary reasons.
Yeah. And sometimes, for instance, there is a case, there's still like in the debate in the psychology field, is that in the science actually, and many people didn't hear about it, is a drug that was produced, right, and sold for years after a research paper on Alzheimer's disease. And it happens to be lately in the past year or so, allegedly, that the pictures were modified. They were not real. So imagine all this stuff that has been for years harming people who were just, thinking that they were taking medication to save or protect themselves or trying to ease the symptoms, and it turned out that everything was fake. So once you have the media that don't even show that kind of stuff, don't even are interested in researching that or educating people about this, what is up to everybody else? So the media has a big part, but I do believe more than ever, us citizens, I'll keep going into it, because at the end of the day, it is us. We are parents, many are grandparents, uncles, sisters, brothers, and we care about our family. We should be the first responsibles to dig for information on every side. I often listen to media or news from the other side, because it's important to compare and contrast. And going back to the President Trump, if he did something wrong, so be it. He has to go accountable. But at the same time, everybody who has done the same thing that we know should be held accountable using the same level of justice. And if he's not, at the same time, we all as citizens, whether you agree or disagree with the man, whether you agree or disagree with Trump, we almost demand the justice, whether for him, is served or not.
No, I mean, it is very scary. I mean, going back to Venezuela, I would like to ask you, when Chavez came to power, I'm sure when he was running for office, he did not say, well, I'm going to impose a socialist dictatorship on you. I mean, what was the attraction? I guess there were a lot of people who thought that he would bring good policies. I mean, what was the attraction? And then I guess...
There is a very popular video out there with Jorge Ramos, who's a very popular journalist for Univision, and he interviews Hugo Chavez, and it's almost three lies after another one. He said that he was not going to take over the media. He said that he was going to leave the power as soon as he needed to go. And he was not going to attack the businesses and not going to bring this crazy socialist or being a dictator. And it turned out the other way around. What people don't realize is that we are all humans. Those politicians, they're not often more smarter than you. President Biden is not probably smarter than many people. He's just a human like many of us. And every human is tempted with corruption, with many things that they can do wrong. And so that's why we will have to keep everyone accountable. Not because they reach to power mean that out of the sudden they're going to be holy, right? We all need to be held, everybody accountable. But we have to strive to make sure the justice is, go across. Okay. So if the Biden administration is pushing this to Trump, the justice system, as blind as should apply the same rules to President Biden and his family.
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have that equal justice. I mean, I'm even afraid. Everyone's talking about the presidential election in 2024. But I am wondering, is that going to be a fair election? I mean, here in Pennsylvania, there are many unusual, I'll just unusual happenings in the middle of the night with hundreds of thousands of ballots being driven in on a U.S. postal truck for the U.S. Postal Service from New York, ballots printed in New York State. And then they come into Pennsylvania, and nobody knows where they went. And then people being locked out of the room where they're counting the votes in Philadelphia and other cities. And you're supposed to be able to see, both parties are supposed to be able to watch and observe the counting. And then the judge says, well, you're 100 feet away. You can observe from 100 feet away. I mean, it is just the corruption of the judiciary system is another issue. And, people say that, well, the judges, they found that there was no corruption. In many cases, the judges said on procedural grounds, we're not going to hear the case. We're not even going to look at the evidence. Yeah.
Well, and I go back to the same. I think it's our citizens should always strive and get involved more in our politics locally, whether it's, city councils, being involved what's going on, making sure when it's polling, make sure that we should guard. We are responsible for guarding our own, not only our own safety and our family, but our freedoms per se, because that's how we lose them. And so it is up to us. And that's why I keep regarding into that, because everybody who's watching now should, have an introspection and say, what am I doing? What am I really doing? Am I speaking up at least? I know it's hard. Some people, work, but some people just keep their mouth shut. They don't really talk. They don't really talk to their neighbors. And it's not a matter of convincing anybody, but having conversations. And so the more we keep raising concerns or raising our voices, the better, those bureaucrats and politicians will pay more attention and will make sure they will say, oh, people are paying attention. We better do what it needs to be done and follow the law and the way it should be. So I think it's very important for all of us and everybody who's watching to be more involved and pay attention to everything that happens, at least in your city and your neighbors, in your state.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on the King's Report again. We really appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you again at the Rod of Iron Freedom Festival. And we wish you well and your son, and God bless you.
Thank you very much. God bless you too, and thank you for having me.